welcome back, and welcome to our special Update Extra from March 19th. These visceral images have stunned us recently as a changing global climate puts extreme weather demands on not just on us, but on our electrical grid. And now as more and more electrical loads, such as trucks and buses and smart devices come online, they need fast and effective ways to communicate to that grid and make sure that we're using that electricity efficiently and that it stays available to us. We also need to plan for hardening and making the grid resilient in the face of increasing climate variability and the extreme weather events that we've seen it driving. Today's Update Extra, looking at the need for and ways to create a dynamic, adaptable grid, was made possible by one of our members, Momentum, and we thank them very much for that help. So we're looking at the tools, technologies, and integration around distributed smart generation, storage, and control. What do we need and how do we get there? We have several guests joining us today, bringing smart perspectives to this issue. Nikki, let's bring them on board.
Yeah, we have with us today Jonathan Levy, who's Senior Engineer at Microgrid Labs. We have also Mary Ann Piette with the Scientific Division Director at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And lastly, Nicole Jeannot, who is Senior Vice President of Development at Alpha Structure.
Great to have everybody here today, and welcome. And hopefully we'll get Mary Ann's camera on here very shortly. We kind of saw the challenges, and Nikki, you want to launch into it? Let's talk about let's sum up what those issues are. And Mary Ann, maybe you want to touch on it. What are the big challenges our grid is facing right now?
Good morning, Bill and Nikki. Our grid is facing seasonal variations as well as extreme events. So when we think about extreme events, we think about weather events. The cold in Texas and the heat we see sometimes in California, even the fires and the power shutoffs. So we have our challenge to make the grid integrate better between the demand side and the supply side with more renewables. And that's something we see year round, as well as the kind of challenges on these extreme days and how we manage our electric system with more electrification and more renewables.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we want to get into are then solutions. We've all kind of seen that there are challenges and that the grid is struggling. There's plenty of grid energy at the high level, but distribution grid has some challenges. So what are the solutions? I'd love to go around the table and hear from each of you about what do you see. And Mary Ann, let's start with you again, but then let's get into Nicole and Jonathan. What do we need to be doing to make the grid more resilient?
Yeah, one of the things we're lucky to have just received a grant from the California Energy Commission on something called the California Flexible Load Research and Deployment Hub, or CalFlex Hub. And the purpose of that hub is to facilitate the state in using digital tariffs to communicate with end-use devices. So trucks, cars, buildings, and the idea is to actually use prices to devices. So we're going to be working on the digital tariff structure and the communication. And one of the things, Bill, that we really need is more integration, which you mentioned earlier, and the ability to make sure, again, that our demand side and our supply side are more integrated, and we have some idea of the prices for the next 24 hours. And that by this continuous communication, we want loads to charge more when the electricity is cheaper and cleaner. And we want loads to reduce their demand on the grid when it's dirtier and more expensive. So we want the prices to reflect system conditions and to communicate those prices.
Okay, great. Nicole, why don't you jump in next? So what's your view on this? That's the optimal where we want to go. How can we get there in terms of depots and sites?
So it's a great question. And I think the solution often includes on-site energy solutions and incorporating more distributed energy resources into how we approach fleet electrifications in specific locations, like you mentioned, depots. And so what is the real potential impact for that site, not just today, but long-term? And so I think with respect to moving to transitioning to electric vehicles in commercial fleets, you often start with 1 or 2 trucks, but thinking of the intersection of our energy supply and demand in relation to the longer term impact, the infrastructure required to achieve that isn't linear. And so at what point do upgrades become required, and is there a way to do that more effectively and efficiently? So yeah, we think the solution is very much local on-site energy solutions.
Jonathan, your observations on this, because I know that you do a lot of planning around fleets trying to figure out how to take this on. It's something they don't really know that well.
Yeah, and I'd also echo that, looking at this holistically, taking a systems level approach to the integration of EVs, renewable energy, on-site storage, on-site generation, microgrids, how that all can play into each other, but looking at it as the project is being planned out and not, after the fact. You get these 1 or 2 buses, but you need to think about it. Okay, we're going to next year get 10, 15 buses. How are we going to service them? How are we going to have enough energy? And then going back to the, changing climate, we need to look at these storms and these weather events were originally thought as maybe 500-year events or 100-year events, but they're happening every 3, 4, 5 years. And so what we used to think of were these, once in a lifetime, once in a generation problems are no longer that. And we really need to look at them ahead of time.
Well, it sounds like there's been some really important and critical thinking and work going into these solutions. I'd really like to hear from our panelists today on what you think some of the barriers to those solutions are. What's really holding these solutions back? Are there breakthroughs that are needed? Some changes to potentially our regulatory frameworks? Or are there more partners needed at the table, or pieces that are missing right now? Maybe we can go in the same order with Mary, Nicole, and Jonathan.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been doing is to try to help the state understand how the loads are changing and which loads are going to be flexible. So we've been modeling what we call shape, shift, shed, and shimmy. And we will be incorporating the fleets in our next model. So far, we've been doing buildings and EVs and behind the meter storage, but adding those, the trucks will allow us to get some sense of the size of the load that we're going to be seeing on the grid. So that's one of the uncertainties, is where's it going to be, and how big is it going to be, and when is it going to be there? So the state can prepare for both locational prices and the wholesale prices to be better integrated and communicating with customers, and having strategies that can help the entire state, the CCAs, the IOUs, the munis, and the owners. We need new business models to help make these investments in managing this infrastructure.
Thanks. Nicole?
So I look forward to working with Mary Ann to understand, the Flex program and how that's being structured, because I think one of the fundamental things that's missing from the market, both in terms of pricing and the regulatory structure, is paying for resilience. So we don't currently value the asset, and therefore we're not seeing those assets being built and offered into the market. And so if we're able to structure both the pricing and the compensation mechanism to be able to incentivize resilience, you're going to see more of it incorporated into the distribution system.
Great, thanks. Jonathan?
And I think, further, that not just quantifying and valuing resilience, but also finding a way to monetize that, so we can get different financing structures, different organizations that are willing to come into the market that can take advantage of those factors. Because right now resilience is expensive, and people aren't necessarily able to afford that. And so getting those additional financial methods in place will really help bring people on.
It's almost a way of, if you will, Jonathan, managing risk and having people understand and take on that risk. And we've seen these new models. Is this something you see moving forward, these new bundling finance models where people can really understand something that they can take the risk off the fleet manager, for instance, to put in infrastructure or timing mechanisms?
Sure, we're seeing a lot of charging as a service or even full fleet as a service models that people are interested in. And so, yeah, absolutely, taking some of that off of the depot manager and being able to just operate their fleet as normal, and someone else is taking over control of when to charge, where to charge, how much to charge at different times, and leave the depot to operate as they need to.
And Nicole, that's part of the new business model for Alpha Structure that you've put together recently.
Yes, although I prefer the more holistic, inclusive term energy as a service, which can incorporate any a variety of different kinds of infrastructure under that umbrella. So charging and infrastructure or vehicles, to Jonathan's point about an increasing number of these turnkey opportunities where the fleet owner is saying, I want to run my business, which is delivering goods or people from point A to point B. I don't want to be in the energy business. And so could you just go and figure that out? And there, we're happy to do that. But yes, I think you're going to see more and more intersection between transportation and the energy world, and how that gets structured, both from a financial point of view and how you underwrite that risk transfer from the beneficial owner to the investor.
So it's this complicated new world that we live in, and yet there are ways to move forward. I mean, we're hearing from all of you that we kind of know what the challenge is. We're starting to model where these new loads are going to be. So what are the next steps? What are the recommendations that we really need to engage in the next few years? Marianne, let's start with you. What do we actually need to action on in the next couple of years?
One of the things we haven't talked about is interoperability and integration. And as we think about building all this new infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, the locational pricing systems, thinking about interoperability and integration, and what is required, what are the standards, the communication standards, what are the different pieces of new hardware and software, and how do we make investments that allow some plug and play capability that we don't really have today. So big investment needed there also.
And is that something that Cal Flex Hub can work in along with other folks in terms of being an asset to that?
Yes, we're working with the state's load management standards program. So the load management standards is got a standard format for digital tariffs, and they will be communicating the prices, time of use prices, critical peak pricing, real-time pricing, and even GHG greenhouse gas signals from watt time and things like that. So we're interested in sending a variety of signals and understanding, can we get those signals to devices, and can those devices respond? So facilitating that infrastructure. Wow.
Okay. Nicole, what are your views, next steps, and your recommendations? What do we got to do in the next couple of years?
Well, maybe to borrow a phrase from an athletic company, I think we've got to just do it. And we're ready to, I think we've been spending a lot of time talking about how to do fleet electrification. There have been some amazing pilots done, both in the transit space and in the commercial transportation space. And so we've learned a lot of lessons, but we're not going to understand how to do this at scale until we try to do this at scale. And there are some organizations leading the way. And I mean, I think the technology is known and understood, and there are lots of investors available, and really it's a matter of picking the right partners, pricing the risk appropriately, and then understanding how to capture those value streams around that, Jonathan mentioned, around monetizing resilience, and really figuring out how we build the case, and then just do it.
So Jonathan, last word to you, but I do think there sounds like there's some regulatory structure issues. There's maybe some seed funding to get these larger scale projects going. And then to Nicole's point, just do it.
I mean, I think I'd further that branching out beyond just the incentives and then the thought process from California into other parts of the state and country and the rest of the world, really. But, because we're seeing a lot of the stuff coming out of California, but in other states, maybe they're not thinking through all of these steps and all these integrations, thoroughly. And we really need to get the word out that it's doable, it's possible. And as Nicole said, just do it.
Well, thank you all of us for joining us here today. You can remember that you heard it here first from Nicole. Just do it. Thank
Credit
you
goes
very
to
much
Nike.
our- Thank you very much to our guests. Thank you for staying here with us for this extra. And thank you to all of the audience members who decided to hang on for this extra 15 minutes of information.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Marianne Piet, Senior Scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Nicole Jeannot, Senior Vice President Development, Energy as a Service, Nicole, at Alpha Structure, and Jonathan Levy, Senior Engineer at Microgrid Labs. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is, unfortunately, our CCTU Update Extra report for March 19th. We could have gone so much longer, Nikki. I wish we had a little more time. But I want to thank Momentum again for their support to allow us to do this extra segment. CCTU will be back next on April 16th. For now, on behalf of our great guests that we just had in the panel and Nikki O'Cook and the entire CalSTART Clean Transportation team, I'm Bill Van Amberg. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe, take care of yourself, and defend others, as we talked about earlier. Together, we are changing transportation and the world for good. See you in April.